everyone. This is Dr. Hindie Klein, and I am so pleased and honored to be part of this presentation in honor of the United to Heal event for a wonderful organization of Amudim. So I'd like to start out by introducing the people on my panel, my trusted friends and colleagues. So we'll start with Dr. Malky Mayerfeld, who some of you may know is my daughter, is our daughter. So let me start with Dr. Malky Mayerfeld. I'm going to just read you a little bit of her bio. Dr. Malky Mayerfeld is a psychologist practicing in Muncie, New York. Dr. Mayerfeld worked at Achieve Behavioral Health in Muncie, where she conducted individual and marital therapy, crisis intervention, clinical supervision, and the co-leading of several groups, including skills-based DBT groups, parenting groups, and process groups within the clinic's intensive outpatient program. She's currently the clinical director of the Muncie Lighthouse Project, which is a drop-in center for young women within the community. She is the clinical consultant for Pillars, an organization for young women who have lost their parents. Dr. Mayerfeld maintains a private practice in which she incorporates a variety of methodologies, including EMDR, sensory motor psychotherapy, and DBT. In addition, Malky has been an active facilitator at Ray of Hope for several years and has done extensive work with sexual abuse survivors. So thank you very much, Malky. It seems that you've had a tremendous amount of experience in many areas, and welcome. Thank you. We also have with us today, welcome Shevi, Mrs. Shevi Samet, who is a Muncie-based kallah teacher, adult educator, and marriage and family therapy trainee with 2 decades of teaching experience focusing on building healthy relationships with oneself, others, Hashem, and His Torah. Her engaging and relatable styles fuses deep ideas with practical applications. Shevi has developed and delivered trauma-informed and emotionally focused teaching workshops for kallah teachers across the communal spectrum. She is also the Associate Director of Education for CORE's Kallah Conversations, Community of Practice, an international community of kallah teachers where she works to cultivate, support, and facilitate continuing education opportunities for kallahs teachers worldwide. Thank you, Shevi. Wow, welcome.
Thank you.
What a beautiful bio. Very impressive.
That I did not write myself.
And I am Dr. Hindie Klein, who I'm going to be the moderator today. And I am a psychologist, psychoanalyst in private practice. I'm the former director of CHICFED OHEL. I was the editor of OHEL's journal, Voices of Strength, Personal Stories of Strength that Empower Our Community. I was also the clinical project manager of the groundbreaking OHEL film, Rising from Divorce. And I've done a lot of different things, and I'm on the clinical advisory board of Amudim, which I am very, very proud of. In addition to all the work I've done for OHEL and et cetera, and my private practice, and on Amudim, I just have to give a wonderful shout out to Nefesh International. I'm on the board of Nefesh International, and I am also on the executive committee of United Task Force, which is a coalition of 40 agencies that serve the community in all different spheres. And they're 2 very important organizations, and they're great, and I'm proud and honored to be on their boards as well. But right here today, we are here to talk about a very important topic, which we are entitling Intimacy, Attachment, and the Inner World. So what happens when you take a psychoanalyst, a trauma therapist, and a kallah teacher, and you put us all together to have a conversation about couples, relationships, trauma, the unconscious, dreams, and everything in between? So we are going to get started. And we've composed a series of questions that I'm going to be asking and posing to Dr. Mayerfeld and to Mrs. Samet, and we're going to have a discussion about it. And then, of course, I'll throw in my 2 cents as a discussant, because that's always fun. All right, here we go. When attachment meets intimacy. How do the patterns of attachment we learned in childhood, our longings, our fears of being too much or not enough, quietly shape the way we enter marriage, the way we seek connection, and experience desire? In your work, and I'll get to both of you, how do you help a kallah or patient begin to trust that love and safety can coexist in the same relationship? What contributes to the making of a marital relationship and intimacy that can be healing and a reparative experience? Malky, can we start with you?
Sure. So if we look at it from a, like the central nervous system perspective, so the body or the attachment system develops through love or attunement with the mother, attachment with the mother. Even from the very, very beginning, upon like the beginning of birth, a child engages in certain developmental movements that teach it about security. So for example, the baby's first moment is to yield into the mother. Imagine a baby who falls asleep on your shoulder. So they have completely like melted into you. That's a sense of yielding. There's also other developmental movements, like they have to push away from you, they have to reach, they have to grasp. All of these things allow them to develop, and it helps reinforce to them what security looks like, if someone will be available. It develops their own autonomy. And all of these are like the building blocks, also with the mother's attunement, of what creates attachment and how they learn about love. So it doesn't just teach us, exactly, how to develop, but it's also about really relying and trusting on another human being. And from a more relational perspective, in order, let's say as we get older and we want to learn to communicate with couples, so we're drawing from this experience of secure attachment, of what it means like and what we're searching for, but what we're essentially learning to do with our partner is to earn secure attachment. Hopefully you are drawn to someone and you marry someone that you feel connected to. But then once you're in the relationship, there is a certain level of trust that has to be built. It's going to be informed by your prior experiences, but it's also going to be informed by interactions that happen within the marriage. And through that, you can develop a narrative of what secure attachment leans on. Does my partner have my back? Can I rely on them? Are they dependable? Do they hear me?
So I think what you're talking about, which is the basic element of early infant attachment, is trust.
Yes.
Right? Eric Erickson, basic trust versus mistrust, one of the basic core, right? And it develops through the mother-infant dyad, right? Through the mother-infant attachment. And I always say the first year is the most important year of a person's development, because with there you develop your trust, your stability, your security. And from there, everything else will follow. Okay, Shevi, please.
So I think that, as a kallah teacher, we're educators, right? And so educators in general we're inclined to focus on our content, on what we're saying, definitely on how we're saying it, right? But we tend to focus more on the what. And our training is really focused a lot on the what. I think would say specifically kallah teachers, where there's so much emphasis on, the hashkafa that you're giving over, the halachah that you're giving over, the practical relationship skills that you want to kind of weave into it. There's a lot of focus on the what. And I think it's also, fair to acknowledge that many teachers in our community also don't necessarily have like formal, like training in terms of, graduate level training and education. Some certainly do. But what that means is that we have many, many educators who their methodology is really informed by their intuition. And I would say that the vast majority of teachers have wonderful intuition, and this very much works. But I also believe that attunement in the educational relationship is something that we need to intentionally cultivate it. Right? So I actually said this to Malky in one of our lunches that we love to have, is that a kallah teacher needs to attune like a therapist and teach like a teacher. The kallah teacher-kallah relationship is unique because it's one-on-one. We're not teaching in large groups anymore, right? So I've been a classroom teacher for many, many years, and that has its own dynamic. There's a lot of input, and there's the dynamic in the classroom is informed by a lot of different things. The benefit of the kallah teacher relationship is that it's one-on-one, but that could also make it a little bit tricky, because you don't have the distractions of a group, right? You also don't necessarily have that input that you would sort of use in a group, whether it's something as simple as somebody else asking the question that you've been thinking of, or the ability to sort of space out, or whatever it might be, right? So I think that there's a unique opportunity in the sense that we can cultivate that sort of almost therapist-client relationship, that one-on-one time. You're spending a significant amount of time together. You're talking about some very intimate, personal, topics. So the attunement in that relationship is crucial. And you have to also do that without losing sight of your objective, which is, I need to teach this kallah halachah. I want to give her the opportunity to build a relationship with the mitzvah of taharas mishpacha that is healthy and honest, right, and authentic to who she is.
So I think that's some amazing points. And I think also, as a kallah teacher, you see, many of us have patients who come to us for whatever problems they have or traumas they have or whatever. But very often there are young ladies who will come to a kallah teacher and not be in therapy, will not even be self-aware that they might have traumas or issues from early childhood, relationships, trust, security, attachment issues. So in a sense, you are like a gatekeeper because they come to you first. Sometimes they may say, oh yeah, by the way, I had this and this trauma, I'm also in therapy. But very often, you're it. And that relationship, that attunement, that picking up of whatever nuance that you need to pick up will not only help your work and is very important to your work, but will also be a bridge because then you'll say, you know what, maybe you could benefit. It seems to me that, and then you could benefit if needed from psychotherapy or, trauma therapy or, well, I do analytic therapy, which is more exploratory of the unconscious as we know it, so on. So, but that's why your role, besides teaching halachah, hashkafa, and marital relationships and the closeness and having a good, healthy marriage is so crucial to being like a gatekeeper for the future of these young ladies.
Yeah, I think that it can be really helpful for kallah teachers to recognize the opportunity in this relationship. Some kallah teachers also teach high school or seminary, they have that persona. And then there are many kallah teachers who don't. They do a variety of other things in addition to teaching kallahs. And I really believe that every kallah hopefully will find the teacher, and some will actually specifically seek out, certain personalities. Let's say a student did not particularly connect to her Chumash teacher, and that's not the personality, that's not the persona that she's really going to be able to learn well from. There's a whole variety of temperaments and personalities and teaching styles that she could potentially learn from, and I think that there's a tremendous opportunity in that. So I would love for kallah teachers to recognize the opportunity they have in being that figure. And I don't think you have to change much. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. When I say attune like a therapist and teach like a teacher, I don't mean become a therapist, right? You are still a teacher. It's more in how you're relating and how you're regulating, and we'll get to this more. So I would love for kallah teachers to recognize that opportunity, and also for kallahs or their mothers, when they're looking for a teacher, pay attention to the relationship that could potentially be built, not only as far as will this be somebody who I can follow up with in the future and have a long-term relationship with, but can this experience be positive relationally, even if I never speak to her ever again?
And I want to add, in addition to what you were saying, not only is it a gateway, that she could recommend a therapist, for example, if someone may not have realized that that's an option, but what Shevi is saying, it's the relationship itself can be reparative, maybe sometimes for the first time ever for a kallah who didn't, but a ruptured attachment.
Because sometimes with a kallah teacher, this is the first experience that they've had with a really good, like a therapeutic alliance.
And female.
And female. So so especially if there are mother issues.
I think it's female, it's hierarchical in a sense, there's an authority figure. I think there's a lot of potential. Somebody could walk away from a relationship like that, even if you didn't directly make a referral, and say like, wow, it's possible for me to connect to, like an authoritative or, older woman in a way that I didn't think was possible.
Right.
Especially in such a vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay. Every question we're going to pose, we could speak about for like an hour.
The whole video.
The whole video. So I think that I'm going to have to move things along because I know that we are time framed. So we're going to go on to our next question, which is called The Sacred and the Wounded in Sexuality. Okay? Many people hold a vision of sexuality that feels holy, but carry experiences that feel fractured or shamed. This is a really, really important topic. How do you help someone reconcile the sacred language of intimacy and the very human places of fear, pain, or numbness? And how can spirituality be a source of healing rather than pressure? And what are some of the ways kallahs or patients hold both holiness and humanity in their experience of intimacy? So, Shevi, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Think about that.
I know for myself, like when I hear a question like this, I get a little panicky, meaning I feel a huge responsibility, like I feel the weight of the question, like I need to make sure that this kallah walks away from our classes feeling like marital intimacy is a holy thing. And that agenda, it shapes the way I structure my teaching, but it can also get in the way, in the sense that if I'm going to be too agenda-driven in my education, then I'm maybe compromising her autonomy, right? She's going to relate to this however she relates to it. And I actually think that the best way that I can give her, a healthy container is to really just hold and accept whatever is coming up for her when we talk about different things. Meaning, it's okay that she's grappling with, you're saying that this is holy, but I also have, negative ideas about what this is. I've gotten other messages. No kallah is coming to us completely blank. Even if she's never received any overt messages around the topic that she's aware of, no message is a message. Why was this never spoken about? Why did I never have conversations with whoever it was, whether it's parents or teachers or mentors, and this is the first time I'm having a conversation. Even coming in blank creates some sort of a foundation, right? I also really believe that what something is objectively and the way people experience it and relate to it can be different. And there really is room for both, right? So a lot of times we'll kind of project our feelings around something for what it is. The number of times that, my students have said to me something like, these halachos are objectifying, or, it's not fair that women become nida, right? So, what I like to gently point out to them is your feelings around this are completely valid. And often, if I'm able to, if I have the information, I'd love to point out to them how it resonates and it makes sense that they have, that they feel this way. And that may or may not be the objective truth, right? It's like if my child comes home and says, you made meatballs for supper, meatballs are disgusting. Well, first of all, interesting because you ate them last week, happily, right? But also, you're not in the mood of it right now. You were hoping for milchiks. This is not what you like. I don't like it, and my kids are incredibly frustrated when I kind of try correct them between the I don't like it and it's not fair. But I do think that there's like a maturity and a healthiness in being able to distinguish between each, but actually still hold onto both, right? So the Torah perspective around marriage and marital intimacy is, right, really based on genuine holiness. There's a sublime element to it, and it won't always be experienced that way by every person every time, and that's okay.
And can I can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
Do you find, or have you found, or do you think it's worthwhile to provide them with religious sources that indicate, like, to bolster your opinion on it, or do you find that just shuts them down if they're already feeling that way? Like anything that would bring out the beauty of intimacy from a spiritual lens?
I think it's a great question. And I think that, like the educator part in us is going to want to go straight to like the content. Oh, that's not how you feel? Well, let me just flood you with information and proof that you should feel that way. Right. And I think we have to time that very, very gently. I think there really needs to be like a genuine validation, not just in our like, oh, it's okay that you feel that way, but would you consider, right? I think that there's a way to do exactly that, slower, more softly, more gentle, and say, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you would feel that way. And then at the right time, I wonder if you're open to having a different relationship with this topic. We're here. Now is the perfect time, right? You're entering into this relationship where this is going to be, a very primary, well, I don't want to say primary, actually, we can take that out. I don't like that. I don't like when we kind of over emphasize, the sexual intimacy. I think that it needs to have its like correct sort of context. But if this is something that you are including in your relationship for the first time, or this is the first time that you're going to be having, a committed, really intimate relationship with another person, does now feel like a good time to consider other opinions? And I have no agenda. You might walk away not feeling that way. And that's something that I have to grapple with.
So if I could just jump in, and this is a little personal for me, but as you're talking, so this was my free associative response and my free associative memory. And it goes back a few years for me, but I remember my kallah teacher. She was amazing. And I think that when I listened to you talking, it was one-on-one many years ago. And I remember then having girlfriends getting married and say, ooh, the thought of going to the mikveh, ooh, I have to go through all these different things, take a shower this way, that way, after the mikveh, because I feel so. And what this woman imbued for me was a sense of how beautiful the experience that I had with her and the experience that she gave me about Taras HaMishpacha, about the laws of Nida, about the experience of going to the mikveh, was that it is a beautiful, I don't know if she ever used the word holy, but she's made it sound, she imbued it with holiness, so that it was such an amazing experience. And going to the mikveh never bothered me. The whole business, even though it was annoying, of course, in all the different aspects that could be annoying when you're a young woman who doesn't want to be separated from their husband, but it was a beautiful experience because the sense of what she brought into the experience between the two of us imbued it with spirituality, holiness, love. I walked away, I remember, we're going back quite a few years ago, I walked away with a feeling of, this is good. I can do this. It's fine. It will create a beautiful feeling in my life. My amazing kallah teacher was the Hava Braunstein. And those were the days she was not, this was before her group days. She was doing one-on-one. And I developed a really, Aleha Shalom. She was an amazing, amazing woman. And she imbued the experience and the teaching, the whole package, with beauty, holiness, spirituality. I never had issues with mikvah. Never.
I would love for all of my kallahs to recognize the potential meaning that they can find in really truly any mitzvah, right? And the meaning is inherent. You're going to relate to it in different ways at different times. Sometimes it might feel beautiful. Sometimes it might lean more towards the frustrating. Sometimes it's even just neutral. I don't have strong feelings about this one way or the other. It's something that I'm doing. I don't hate it. I don't love it. It just is. And I actually find that a lot of times women feel uncomfortable with that. There's two camps. There's the love it or the hate it, and I have to put myself in either one. What if it just is?
No.
What if it just is? And it's inherently meaningful because that's what mitzvos are.
And it's part of life.
And it's part of life.
It's part of the beauty of life. Okay.
I want to add one thing, if we have time. I want to add one point. Similar to how Rebbe Bronstein infused with holiness, I think a little bit of a side point, but something that might help with feelings of objectification is from Rebbe Neuberger when she teaches Tuma and Tahara, because people might have a visceral reaction to that. It's not about Tuma Tahara, which it is, but it's essentially about accessibility and inaccessibility. You're accessible now, you're not accessible now. First of all, it's within you. It's in a sense somewhat empowering. And it's also more descriptive, like you're saying, as opposed to a judgment. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of looking at it, and it's also the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, these responses are so nice. Okay, I know we have to move on. So let's go to attachment, safety, and the sacred. And I think this one is going to be for you, Shevi.
Maybe you're doing the next one.
So let me read the question. Trauma therapy posits that emotional and physical safety is the prerequisite for secure attachment and healthy intimacy. How can the kallah teacher's instruction on the sanctity of the marital bond and the practice of nida, which is family purity laws, be utilized to enhance the sense of safety and secure attachment, particularly for a couple where one or both partners have a history of relational trauma?
Yeah. This is a big one. Thanks. And in short, I'm going to try and, do justice to the answer because I think, because it's huge and also really subjective and is going to be experienced differently by different people. So, I'm trying to give a broad answer, and if someone's listening and it doesn't resonate, like, that's okay. There's nothing, it's not you. It's just I'm trying to be as broad as possible. When you initially in kind of like our introduction, we're talking about trust and how important trust is and how that's really the sort of cornerstone of safety and security and stability in a relationship. As challenging as the halachos are, the laws of nida are, and I would hope that they're challenging to a certain extent. I always tell my kallahs, like, if it's not hard, please call me, right? Maybe there's a different conversation that we need to have. There should be a certain amount of struggle within it, but there's a lot of potential to build trust in restraint, right? When we experience in our marriages the desire for something, and then restraint because we have the desire to connect in this way as a couple, and we also have the desire to observe these laws and kind of prioritize what Hashem wants over what we want. And when we make that choice and in the process exercise restraint, there's a tremendous potential there for building trust. And I think a lot of couples kind of shy away from this and they don't necessarily convey this to one another. But I think that there's something so powerful in saying, I want this, and I also want this, and I'm choosing this for the benefit of our, whatever it is, the sanctity of our marriage, our spiritual values, whatever it might be, right? Mm-hmm. And to be able to hold that and really feel like, wow, like, so I trust you to not just act on whatever your current desire is, but this is about something bigger. This is about, you're able to sort of, hold back where necessary, and in the process build a lot of trust. Now, certainly when there's any kind of relational trauma, the idea that we can't have the connection that we want can certainly be re-traumatizing to a certain extent. It's painful, and it's possible that there's another way to relate to the restraint that isn't negative, but is maybe an opportunity to build more trust and safety.
Mm-hmm. That's Mal.
I'm wondering, and Shevi, you can tell me if you think this resonates, but do you think it's possible, especially for somebody who has survived a trauma, to see halachah as a container? In other words, there's a structure, a very clear structure to halachah. And like we said before, you're not always accessible, which maybe works for them. And so can we see halachah as a containing element that has very defined rules to a certain extent, and to create safety because it's containing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 100%. I think that it makes a lot of sense that many people will experience halachah as, an affront to their autonomy, right? And I think like you're saying, there's value in having the shared expectation even, something that can be really challenging for couples if, either one is a survivor of any kind of a trauma, is kind of negotiating the types of intimacy that they'll experience together and when. Mm-hmm. It's always a bit of a fraught topic. It's like, if somebody is initiating that kind of connection, they're not just offering you like a cup of coffee, they're offering you themselves. And so when we sort of either decline or want to negotiate when that kind of connection happens, it's very, very fraught. And there can actually be something really useful in having, like you're saying, a container, a structure that sort of informs how we'll connect and when. So yes, it can certainly, we sometimes have to grapple with this isn't my choice, the choice is being imposed upon me by halachah and that kind of a narrative, although we always have free choice. We always have, the capacity to choose what we're going to do and if we're going to follow that. But yeah, I do agree that there is another way to look at it. And I think that sometimes we do have to sort of take ourselves out of our current narrative and expose ourselves to something else potentially. I think the kallah teacher can really do that, but it has to be gentle. It cannot be agenda driven, because if like I'm hearing what my kallah is telling me, I don't relate to it this way, and I'm saying, uh-oh, help. If she's not relating to it this way, I am not a good teacher. I'm failing as a teacher, you know, and if I'll feel successful as a teacher, if she walks out of here excited to do this. It's a
little more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I want to mention something that maybe you could speak to more, because when Shevi was speaking before about the communication that really needs to take place between the couple, even within the confines of halachah, always within the confines of halachah, then really in a sense what she's speaking about is mutuality. And if we're going back to repairing attachment wounds or creating, like we said, earned security, then there is this sense of mutuality where I see your inner world, you see my inner world, and we relate to each other. And, you know, from a psychodynamic perspective, I'm sure there's so much to be said about that.
So I look at that, and it's a great comment and a great question. So I look at that as, you know, when we talk about, again, many of, especially people who have relational trauma, what is one of their biggest, I don't know if it would be fears or issues, the vulnerability aspect. It's really hard for them to be vulnerable with the other. They have a hard time being vulnerable with themselves.
Right.
So it's really hard being vulnerable with the other. So part of building a good marriage and a good relationship is the ability to know I feel safe, I feel trusting, and I can be vulnerable with my partner, and I can, and they have my back, I have their back, and we're on the same page, and so on and so forth. And you could kind of let go, and that has to do a lot with physical sexuality too.
And that's the yielding I was telling you about.
The yielding, right, right. The yielding and
really
the letting go.
surrendering to something.
You're surrendering, and that's when you have a better sexual experience, and that's when you have a better physical experience, because you are allowing whatever vulnerabilities you have to kind of be there, and the other, whether it's the husband, the kallah teacher, the therapist, contain that and hold that and take care of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we are going to move on. Yes? Thank you. Let's talk about transference in the teaching and therapeutic relationship. So in both therapy and kallah teaching, students or patients often project deep hopes, fears, parental dynamics onto the teacher or the therapist. How can we work with those transferences in ways that bring awareness and healing rather than confusion? What are the signs that transference is occurring? And how can naming the dynamic itself become part of the healing or learning process?
I think it's important to understand, just as a foundation, that any time an individual enters a space that either feels safe, and specifically with an authority or someone who's guiding them, it's very likely that, and I say safety because if it's safe, then these feelings can emerge. But most of the time, it's also, let's say, with authorities, especially if it's a female authority, right? Which is why it could happen just as equally in the kallah teacher room as in the consulting room. But essentially what happens is that many attachment wounds, if there are, which we all have some, even though you're the best, begin to surface and begin to get projected onto, you know, the person who's in front of you. Now, you know, the task is not to just immediately like analyze or whatever, or even to like react, because you can get very reactive because they might be presenting something to you that might feel uncomfortable for you. But really the goal is to be curious. And like, I think if, as a therapist, and I'm sure in all of our realms, if you can maintain a sense of discovery with compassion and without judgment, then you really create a space and an arena where there could be an understanding that they're delving into. I think in terms of like, let's just say in the therapy room, how do you work with that? So I think even before everything, you really have to, this is where mindfulness and somatic awareness comes into play. Because number one, you want to be mindful to your state that you're in. Whether it's your own unconscious things, and we could talk about that more in the context of countertransference, but just in what's being elicited in you. Is this something that's often elicited? Does it feel different today? Does it feel different today with this person than it did last week, right? And then, so one, you really want to maintain a stance of mindfulness, and then you want to also tune into your body and see, do I feel tension? Am I suddenly feeling a need to protect or to save? Am I feeling a sense of anger? You know, do I have to fix everything? So it's about pausing, really. It's about noticing what's going on in the room. It's about noticing what's going on between the two of you. But it's really about maintaining that sense of curiosity and compassion.
Right. So I want to jump in before we get to Shevi, because I think it's important for the audience to understand. We'll talk about countertransference, which is our own inner thoughts, feelings, emotions, and whatever issues we have from our past that come out during the treatment. And then we can start analyzing within ourselves, why are they coming out during a session, or why are they coming out with that particular patient. But if we go back and look at transference, so what you said is true. Transference is the projection of the patient projects onto the therapist, onto the kallah teacher, any issues or past historical dynamics or conflicts or patterns, dynamic patterns, relational patterns. So if they had this and this kind of relationship with their mom, their dad, their boss, they're this one, they're that one, it can get projected onto the therapist. So now the therapist becomes the mother who's always criticizing them. I want to concretize it so the audience can understand very clearly what transference is, as opposed to countertransference, which is our issues that come up because of our past. Everybody's got a history and everyone's got issues. So transference is the projection of the patient onto the analyst, therapist, kallah teacher, whomever, the boss, of past imagos or past issues that get played out onto the therapist. And it's the therapist's role, like you said, to hold the space, to contain the space, the kallah teacher's role. Hold that space, listen to what they're saying, be present for them. And then, of course, whether it's listening to their unconscious, which is more analytic, or doing somatic work, or doing EMDR work, or whatever it is you're doing. You know, when I used to run the clinic and supervise these students would come to me and say, okay, but I don't want to study psychoanalysis. They would ask me advice. I said, no problem, because I would always encourage them to go for postgraduate work. You're going to go for postgraduate work. You always say, you don't have to be an analyst. You want to be an expert EMDR, somatic experiencing, sensory motor, just study and do that well. Okay. I had to give my little plug for education.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
I love
Shevi.
that. And I think it can be it's really helpful for kallah teachers to be aware of the fact that transference and countertransference does play out in the relationship. We tend to think of it as something that's exclusively therapeutic. And it's not. It very much, again, because this is a unique dynamic. We're teaching, but it's one-on-one. And when I was first looking for kind of more education and training around how to be trauma-informed in my teaching, I actually Googled trauma-informed tutoring. Because I was looking for something out there. No, because most of the trauma-informed education is systemic, classroom-based. People aren't generally in educational relationships that are one-on-one. That's not so common, right? So there's something really unique that plays out here. So for kallah teachers to be aware that it's happening, and it's not bad. It's not bad that it's happening. It is happening. I would say for, in this relationship, the two that play out the most are going to be prior relationships with a parent, specifically a mother, and teachers. I would say high school teachers even more, seminary teachers, because that's often the sort of role that you're most similar to in her life. And if she is projecting, not to pathologize it. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. Not to defend yourself, but I'm not her, right? It's just like notice it, like you're saying, Malky, like a sense of curiosity and just and to hold it.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I think compassion goes so far.
Yeah.
And I think it's necessary for ourselves in the room and then for who we're working with.
As we go back, like we just talk about in the attachment literature, attunement.
Yeah.
It is Theodore Reich wrote a book, Listening with a Third Ear. It's an old Freudian book from he was an old Freudian analyst from the 1940s. And he would say you have to learn how to listen, not with both ears, but with your third ear. Pick up the unconscious. Pick up what they're saying and what they're not saying. And that's what he calls in this listening with the third ear. It's a very important concept, how to listen and with compassion and so on. Okay.
Adding to your point, sometimes I'll even get feedback, let's say in session, that we'll be talking about either business matters or technical matters in the beginning, and then we'll get into the content of the session. And my patients will even point it out to me like, oh, you shifted, you're speaking in a different voice, something feels different. And I may not even notice personally, but what's really happening is that I'm not going, okay, now we're in work mode. It's not a very conscious thing. I'm slipping into this much deeper level of listening, and I'm pulling from like a deeper place. And by doing so, I'm able to really hear what they're saying. You're also bringing in the past, their personal history. You're bringing in what's non-verbally happening in the room. It's a completely different level of
Right, you're in a different
hearing.
zone. Right.
Yeah, different
And
zone.
as we talk about the difference between the therapeutic relationship, the transference relationship, and the real relationship, like Greenson talks about.
The real relationship.
Ralph Greenson talks about the real relationship, the bills, the timing, the schedule. You have to take care of that too. You have
Or
to be
just
real.
two humans in a
Or
room.
two humans in a room
Like, I'm
talking
sorry,
about
I
anything.
broke your foot.
Right, exactly. Oh, you were sick last week? How are you feeling?
Right. Or you had a loss.
Or he has this amazing example, I just have to say. In his book on psychoanalysis, and he talks about the real relationship. He introduced this. He talks about how he had a supervisee, a psychiatrist, who came to him every week talking about this woman, the woman whose husband was very sick. Or I think the husband was very sick, something like that. And one day the supervisee, the psychiatrist in training, came in and said, "My patient dropped me." And why'd your patient drop you? What am I doing wrong? My patient dropped me. Why? Because he never asked. He never asked the patient, like, how are you feeling? How is your husband doing? That's part of the real relationship. That's humanity. And he never asked. He went straight into a very psychoanalytic, kind of mode and mold of, doing, being silent and so on and so forth. He never utilized his real relationship with her in a very therapeutic
But
relationship
there's
way.
a person in the room with you.
Exactly.
You're two people together.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. So there's some wonderful questions here, and I thank you to the team for coming up with these amazing questions. I want to try to get to, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine a kind of few concepts together, and then we can have some time to really talk it through, explore it. Okay, so let's talk about shame and how it can relate to transference and triggers and relational conflict, and then ultimately talk about rupture and repair. How's that?
Perfect.
Ladies, here we go. How do we work with the shame that often surrounds sexuality, especially when that shame is intergenerational or culturally embedded? It's a biggie.
Yeah.
I want to talk about discussion of superego development, trauma transmission, and the specific cultural context that kallah teachers navigate.
Yeah. So, as a kallah teacher, Torah educator, there's like a part of me that really wants to answer this from like a Torah-based perspective, and then also, but with the emotional health in mind also. And then Malky, you can kind of jump in more clinically. First of all, the therapeutic definition of shame, and then the Torah concept of busha are not exactly the same thing. And very, very briefly, busha, right, which we often translate as shame, is really it's the natural corrective system that Hashem gave each of us so that we can learn from our behaviors and self-correct, right? It's like the spiritual nerve ending that we need that tells us that we've kind of crossed a line. The same way
Almost sounds more like guilt.
Maybe, and I think sometimes this turns into semantics, like guilt, and because, regret would be more charata, right? Like if you think of the shame system, busha came into the world after Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas. Previously, they didn't really need busha. They didn't need this self-corrective system because there was no Yetzer Hara that was internalized. Once the Yetzer Hara became something that we have to walk around with all the time, well, how do we do that safely? Our busha helps us. Yeah, so the same way if I'm walking and I walk into a wall and I'll feel it, physically I'll feel it, my nerve endings will take in that input of wall, boundary. Yeah, so that sort of drop in my stomach that I feel when I said something or did something that wasn't aligned with my values is going to help me self-correct. So maybe it's like guilt. I think if we're going to kind of borrow, the differentiation. But busha assumes that a person...
Well, it's part of superego development, right? It's how you... Right.
Yeah.
How you develop your superego and how your superego is developed by the way you were raised to develop a sense of right and wrong.
Correct. Yeah, because busha does not compromise your inherent self-worth, right? Busha is, I am a good person. I am in the Shema, loved by Hashem, and I just did something or said something or behaved in a way that fell short of his expectations of me, my expectations of myself. That's an uncomfortable feeling that we understandably try and avoid, but really is very, very useful to us.
Are you saying that shame doesn't really exist from a strict Torah perspective?
You're saying shame like the therapeutic,
Yeah.
Brene Brown, like,
Yes.
meaning it exists because people experience it.
Right, but in terms of an emotion that the Torah uses to depict our experiences. Not that it's not valid because you experience it as the self, but
Yeah, I think that it's I made a
embarrassment
mistake.
is because I did something wrong.
Right. Well, again, embarrassment is often in front of other people, right? It's I made a mistake, not I am a mistake.
Like you said, right from wrong. It's
Right.
moral development.
Yeah, the idea.
It's moral development.
And I
It's-
would say even more than that
which develops over the years with development.
Right,
Aging.
right, exactly,
Aging.
exactly. And I think it's really interesting to consider where kallahs often are developmentally, even just age-wise, and how that plays into their superego development.
A very, very quick example of moral development. On the IQ test, when you give IQ tests, there's a subtest called comprehension. And on comprehension, it's all about questions, what do you do if? So for example, if you find a wallet on the street and it's filled with money, what do you do? And then you see how the child or the adult responds.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I found a wallet, I'll take the money, who cares, finders keepers type of attitude. Or do I look inside the wallet, try to see who it belongs to, and hashava saveta, right?
Yeah.
And return it to
Right.
that person.
Yeah,
The 2-point answer is return it to that person.
yeah. And I would say it's
Right?
like,
The one,
2-point.
it's a 2-point, it's a 2-point, 1 point
Showing
what?
a sense of development.
It's showing a sense of what is the right thing to
if
do.
you know right from wrong.
yeah.
If you know right from wrong. Picking it up and saying, oh, too
It's
bad,
not
I
just a
found
moral
that.
thing. What you're saying maybe is that a lot of behavior that let's say we'll see is coming from a place of stunted development, not because a person is inherently good or bad.
Well, how they were developed, yes.
Right. In other words, let's say someone had a tendency to steal, like what you're saying. Let's just say, right? That might not be pathological, but it might be developmentally something happened that they didn't consciously learn.
Didn't consciously
right
learn
from
to
wrong.
know the right from wrong. And as a matter of fact, I know somebody who did a study, a PhD dissertation study on, he analyzed all the responses of comprehension subtests on the IQ test, and consistently, Orthodox Jewish kids always came out higher on comprehension.
Wow.
Always. Good to know.
Wow. One point that I want to add to all of this is that if we're assuming that, shame is a sort of very healthy, self-correcting system that Hashem gave each of us to inform our, let's say, morality, right? So it's the more I'm able to hold myself in that warm, positive regard, the more I'm going to want to hold myself accountable. They're not actually on opposite ends of the spectrum. But when we have so much accountability and no warm regard, I think that's when we fall into this, really like debilitating shame. But if we had lots of positive regard and no remorse, I mean, that's quite dangerous also.
Exactly.
So I think that when we
Nice
talk
balance.
about, yeah, exactly. You really need to hold both. And I think that we see that, I'm in Neshama, Hashem loves me. I'm in this world for a reason. I have inherent self-worth, and I'm not always going to make the right decision, right? Let's say the kid does take the wallet and keeps the money for himself. When he wakes up the next morning, how does he feel about himself versus about what he did, right? So I think that we get a lot of messages that leave us feeling very shameful around, sexuality and intimacy. And I think we kind of need to separate between how this makes us feel and what it actually is. Because if marital intimacy is an experience, that is a mind, body, soul, the neshamos are connecting through the body with the emotions, with the intellect, it's everything all together, right? I'm bringing my whole self into this and the spouse's whole self into this. So that warm regard for myself and for the other is integral, right? And it's also understandable that sometimes we will feel a certain amount of this yucky shame, because how comfortable are we with bodies, our own bodies? I guess that just sort of balance between body, soul. We do get a lot of messages that I think are, they're important messages that prioritize, the soul over the body. We want to be careful that in those messages, we're not demonizing the body. We're not shaming the body, right? Like, I think that sometimes that's a piece of it that happens. And that's before you even get into anything, traumatic, relationally traumatic, sexually traumatic. So in terms of, practically kind of how do we deal with this? I think that's a huge, huge answer. I think we ourselves, the teacher, the therapist, whoever it is, we need to kind of sort that out within ourselves, because there is going to be, the counter transference for sure, right? What does their shame bring up in me? And I think that we also need to, just from an educational perspective, be really firmly anchored in an understanding of what sexuality is, and how busha plays into that, how shame might play into that, and that just that.
And also culturally, what the children have been taught or not taught,
Correct.
or exposed to or not exposed to
Right.
over the course of their development.
Correct.
So there are many young men and women that go into kallah classes or chassan classes knowing very little about sexuality, very little about pleasure and desire. They know somehow in their body, but they don't know it because they don't know their body. Many of
Right.
people that I work with, they don't know their own bodies.
Yeah.
And this is something that comes out hopefully in a good kallah class, but so it's very culturally based as well. So there has to be, when a kallah teacher or a therapist is working with, let's say, young men and women who are coming, let's say, from more restricted environments, that they were not exposed, girlfriends, boyfriends, physical, anything like that. They need to understand and go into that knowing what they need to learn about their bodies and about pleasure, of course, halachah and so on, and spirituality and, a whole attitude. But they need to also understand, because of marriage and so on, their bodies. They need to understand their bodies, right? Okay, Malka.
I also want to mention, just whether in regards to shame or in regards to any triggers that come up, in an intimate space, or emotions that come up, intimate or non-intimate, but let's say within the context of the relationship. And this is really something that I've learned from, survivors that I've worked with, because, we try to fix, use a grounding tool, use this, use that, right? Like, and at a certain point, many of them are like, just don't, like, this is not working, I need help. And what we've discovered together, what works is, number one, first, always being mindful about what your current somatic or emotional experience is. But then number two, sometimes it's enough to just say, this is what I'm experiencing right now. I don't need to fix it. I'm filled with shame. I know the logical and intellectual reasons why I shouldn't feel that right now. I even know why I do feel that way right now. I can't necessarily change it right now, but I can accept it for what it is, and I can have compassion for myself.
And can you help me hold that?
Can you help me hold that in the therapy room? And then can they learn to hold that for themselves when they're in an intimate space with another person?
And when they're with themselves.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of, from a kallah teacher perspective, a lot of normalizing that, it's okay that you don't necessarily love everything about your body. We can still respect, we can still accept, we can still...
It's like psychoeducation.
Yeah.
It's like real psychoeducation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And non-pathologizing.
So,
Yeah.
and non-pathologizing. Okay, so, this has really been amazing. There's so much. We could sit here for hours because both days.
We need more coffee.
Both of you have so much to say, and you have both been so incredibly eloquent and wise and well-educated.
As have you.
Thank you. And it's just been a wonderful experience for me. I have to say, I think we're meeting for the first time.
Yeah, we are.
This has been an amazing meeting to meet you for the first time. You're just so wonderful and brilliant. And this is not my meeting with you, Malky, for the first time.
That would be enough.
But as
paper.
usual, I shep nachas with you, for you, every time we talk.
As I do from you as well.
Okay. So we're going to end with the following question. I'm going to read it. It's a little bit. Talking about repairing the disconnect. When intimacy feels frightening, shameful, or distant in therapy, teaching, or marriage, what does repair look like? How can emotional safety and spiritual meaning work together to rebuild trust? How do you define repair within your discipline? What does a moment of repair sound like or feel like when it's happening well? And considering that both psychoanalysis, which is, let's say, where I come from, and trauma therapy, where Malky comes from, and with a therapeutic relationship, and the kallah teacher teachings and wisdom where you come from, all of us view marriage as a path to spiritual perfection. We're always looking for sites for relational repair. How can the act of marital intimacy itself be intentionally framed and practiced as a powerful tool for healing past attachment wounds and repairing the impact trauma? Because as we know, very often when there has been trauma pre-marriage, and it's whether it's addressed by the kallah teacher or even when it's addressed in therapy, there are still major ruptures that can develop in the marital relationship, because sometimes it's so hard from both sides. Because sometimes we always assume, let's say, oh, the kallah, the young wife, has trauma and therefore she's bringing that into relationship. Well, sometimes you see with couples, they both have trauma that is being brought in to the marital relationship, and that's affecting.
Sometimes trauma happens in the marriage.
Yeah.
And in the marriage.
Yeah.
So it gets really complicated. So how do we address, intimacy as repair? How can we do this? It's difficult.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I say briefly because I feel like none of my answers are as comprehensive as I wish they could be.
We could go on for hours.
We could go on for hours. We're just trying to give little nuggets. No answer is really a full answer. But to start with, kind of what you ended with, I think that when we look at marital intimacy as an experience of really intense attunement, and the way that we can attune to each other emotionally, physically, right? I think in that is a lot of the repair, and very often it takes a lot to kind of get there. Like we've talked about, the vulnerability, which can be very anxiety provoking, certainly, the necessity for trust and for safety. But when it can happen, I think that in and of itself is very, very reparative, and it's not an all or nothing. I think that sometimes we look at these experiences like, was the experience reparative? And what if we looked at that and said, were there elements of this experience that I felt were really reparative, as opposed to the whole thing? Like that moment, or I was able to express something and the other person was able to catch that. Like that in and of itself was reparative, as opposed to the whole thing. And I would say, very much for in the kallah teacher-kallah relationship, so there's definitely potential for repair, even small things like a misattunement. I said something, it was overwhelming. Just to even notice that and say something like, I think I missed something. It feels like, I didn't quite answer your question. It doesn't even necessarily have to be therapeutic. A kallah asks a question and I answer based on what I assume her question was, and then I see on her face that wasn't quite her question. And I can say something like, is that what you were asking, or did I? That's a repair. Right? That's a realignment. I think it's an ongoing process.
That's an excellent repair, because it gives the person the opportunity to know that if the other, meaning let's say in this case you, is not doing something right, it's okay to ask and to say, you know what? No, that's not what I was wanting. That's not, and to ask it another way, or to ask from the other person, because maybe they come from histories where if they didn't say it just exactly right, or ask for it just exactly right, whatever, they might be screamed at, or they might be abused, or they might be dismissed. Here you're saying, it's okay. I didn't get you. Ask again.
Yeah, I invite you to tell me.
And I invite you to tell me. I invite you, it's okay.
Yeah.
It also relays a message of respect to the patient or the student that, I thought I understood it one way, but really at the end of the day, you hold the wisdom to yourself. And I have to respect that and see this as a collaboration, that I'm really hearing you and understanding it from your perspective. And through that, you can become healed.
Excellent
Yeah,
word.
yeah.
I use that word all the time.
Yeah.
Perspective is so.
I think it's huge.
Important.
Even if I don't get the sense that I missed the question, a lot of times I'll ask, like, did that answer your question? Or did anything in that resonate with you? I think there's a humility that we need to bring into these experiences.
Tremendous.
Yeah, that really are reparative. Because if somebody, did experience relational trauma, they probably were not in the presence of a tremendous amount of humility, right? And when we can bring that into the relationship and say, I don't know for sure if I got you or not, but I would love to know if I did and what I could do different, I think that's huge. And that's one of the ways where, again, we're not as teachers necessarily doing this therapeutically. We're using education as a way to sort of create, that repair. I think not like challenging our students in such a frontal way. Really, it's okay if you didn't catch that the first time. I'll say repeatedly, there's no expectation that you're going to hear me say this once and you walk out of here an expert on these laws. That's not my expectation, and to really convey that repeatedly, because there's a lot of pressure.
Right,
There's a lot of
because
pressure.
that's in keeping with what we call therapeutically the working through experience. Because and I'll say this to patients all the time, you're going to repeat, and I'm going to ask you to repeat the same story over and over and over again. I've had patients say to me, am I not boring you? And I'll say no, because that's part of the working through process. We go over it over and over again, and every time we come to a different level of consciousness, a different level of meaning, a deeper level of meaning. And sometimes it works, and sometimes we have to keep going. But that whole, and also validating them and saying, you know what, maybe I got this wrong. Like, I didn't quite get you. So tell me again, it's okay.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I think that idea of like the working through, to recognize both as a kallah and as the kallah teacher or anybody else involved, that typically people will need to learn and be exposed to these ideas over and over and over again over the course of their entire marriages. A lot of times we have this expectation, like, I'll learn this when I'm engaged, and either it will be a positive experience or a negative experience, and then that's going to inform my relationship with this whole topic moving forward. And sometimes we do need to hear it again at a different stage. That's how I felt about it when I heard it for the first time, before I was even married, before I was even in it. And do I still feel that way about it? In either direction. I thought it was so meaningful or beautiful, and now I'm not so sure, or I didn't really connect to it, but now here I am, married 25 years, and I have a whole different perspective. The going over it and the working through, I think, happens educationally also.
Good. Yeah. Malky. Final words.
I wanted to add something on rupture and repair, which is really so much of the crux of the work, I think, in therapy. And I think one of the things that we're talking about ruptures, and what's important to keep in mind is that, rupture it's not a disappointment. It's an inevitability. It will happen.
Excellent point.
In every relationship that you have.
Point.
Yeah.
And I think from a therapist perspective, any kind of therapy that you practice, from a kallah teacher, any, dynamic, it's, can you hold steady to a certain extent? Can you remain with it? Can you create safety in the room so that really the truth can emerge? Vulnerability. You can take ownership over what happens on either side. You can empathize because you might have hurt someone, and then you attempt to reconnect. And in that reconnecting, that's where it's a foundational shift. And that's where safety gets created. That's where people are able to recreate a narrative. Like, things can go wrong and you're still here and I'm still here and we survived and it's okay. And I can learn that people are trustworthy. And I think it's such a fundamental, beautiful element of therapy. And I think it's something that each of us appreciate in all of our different ways of working.
Right.
As kallah teachers, we talk so much about connection and the potential for connection and how to build connection. I think it's really important that we also normalize that there will be moments of disharmony. And that doesn't mean that your relationship, there's a lot of fear around that, a lot of anxiety around that. And I think that when we're educating about relationships and about marriage specifically, and we talk about how, this desire that Hashem has for us to be connected, all the different opportunities for connection, we can't leave out the inevitability, like you said, of rupture. The fact that it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's an opportunity to repair and reconnect and strengthen, without demonizing the disharmony, which is, it's inevitable.
Right.
It doesn't mean something's wrong.
No.
It's just a part of a relationship.
It means you're two feeling people
Correct.
who are communicating. If you're not rupturing, you're probably not talking.
Right. People who have really, mild relationships are probably not connecting.
I think that very often people feel that if there's a major rupture, that's it. Maybe it's beyond repair, maybe because of what happened to them in the past.
Right.
And now in therapy, they see there could be a rupture, whether it's real between the therapist and the patient, or whether it's transferential.
Very important to
Being,
understand.
and very important to understand, is this a real rupture? Maybe I screwed up. Maybe I did something wrong in the treatment.
And it happens.
And it happens all the time. And you have to understand that. And you have to understand how to repair that real relationship rupture. And then also differentiate it from, is this a transference relationship rupture? I represent somebody to them. I represent their mother. And now when I act a certain way, it reminds me them of the mother. And that's why they get angry at me. And then there's a rupture. And how am I repairing that? And you have to walk that delicate balance all the time, understanding the difference between between therapist and patient, real relationship rupture, and between the transferential relationship. And sometimes they look like they're melding into each other, and you just gotta know it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you.
has been, thank you, Shevi. Thank you, Malky, Dr. Mayerfeld, Mrs. Samet.
Klein.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I just want to put in a final statement about Amudim and how I've been on the clinical advisory board of Amudim for many years. They're an amazing organization. They help so many people. I can't name everybody. I could name Tzvi and Miriam, but everybody who works there they're so amazing, and they've done such amazing work. And look what they support every year, these type of presentations. So I thank Amudim.
They really give a voice to things that are not always spoken.
And I thank the two of you. You have been absolutely outstanding, really outstanding. I hope that the people who see this are able to walk away with something really meaningful. I'm hoping they will. And have a great day.
Thank you.